How many people here think Brian Williams lied? I can't hear you.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Evan, what's going on here?
Yeah, Brian Williams. We all know who Brian Williams is, by the way?
A liar.
Okay, so some of you do. For those of us who read and watch news each day, we know him as the NBC anchorman for NBC Nightly News. Everybody else, you probably remember him. He once did a slow jam on Jimmy Fallon's show of the news. So that's probably where you might have known him. So, Brian found himself in a big old boiling pot of water this week. And it all dates back to an incident that took place in 2003. So, March 24th, 2003. Who was around then? Everybody in this room, maybe? That was 2 years before the SGU, and it was 4 years before the first version of the iPhone.
Wow.
Can you believe that? Isn't that remarkable? So in technological terms, it's ancient history. But it's the war in Iraq, okay? We've just gone in, we've waged war, we've led the coalition in there, and we've got boots on the grounds and planes in the sky. And Brian Williams is aboard a helicopter. He's embedded with soldiers, with the 159th Aviation Regiment for a first-hand account of the Iraq War theater. And he described it the other night, just a week ago, basically, by saying this. These are his words. The story actually started with a terrible moment a dozen years back during the invasion of Iraq when the helicopter we were traveling in was forced down after being hit by an RPG. That's rocket-propelled grenade, by the way. Our traveling NBC News team was rescued, surrounded, and kept alive by an armored mechanized platoon from the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry. Okay. And Brian had virtually said the same thing a couple years prior in another interview, and that's been his story for the last few years. However, Brian Williams' initial reporting of the story, this is back in 2003, and in subsequent years right after 2003, had it a little differently. He said that he was in a different helicopter than one out of another group of helicopters, one of which actually got hit by the RPG, but it was not his helicopter. So recently, one of the flight engineers from the 159th, who was on board one of the helicopters, he heard Williams's most recent accounting of this story, and he went to the media to offer his own recollection of what actually happened, and he set the record straight, saying, look, Brian Williams his helicopter was not hit by the RPG. And then other armed forces personnel came along, and of course the media, followed up on this, and they've been kind of getting their hands on as many soldiers who were part of this as they can, trying to really reconstruct sort of what's been going on here. So, just the other night, 3 nights ago, Brian Williams apologized to his audience on TV. He said he made a mistake in the recalling of the events from 12 years ago and extended his respect and apology to the brave men and women, the air crews who were also in the desert at that time. But it's kind of, in a sense, too late. I mean, the internet...
An error in recalling something. What does that mean? An error in recalling something.
The error in recalling.
For a professional newsman.
It's
like a wardrobe malfunction.
Yeah, that's right.
And so,
it's a memory malfunction.
To your point, Joe, like a lot of people, they basically started to light the torches and got out the pitchforks, and they're all calling for Brian Williams, who's supposed to be, this man of great integrity, highly respected newsman, to step down. I mean, really resign his position because he's outright lying. They feel about his retelling of this story, right? He's basically stealing heroism that doesn't belong to him, in a sense. NBC has even launched an internal investigation as to what's going on. So it's not just the public now, corporations are involved, and it's become this whole big entire mess. So what's really going on? Did Brian Williams deliberately lie about this and change the history of the story? Or perhaps did Brian Williams kind of have a brain fart?
So I wrote about this during the week, and just to construct an alternate narrative, right? So let's say that he did not deliberately lie. Is it plausible that his memory could have shifted over the years so that 10 years after the fact, he remembers himself being in the helicopter that was hit with enemy fire? Mm-hmm. And the answer is absolutely yes. That is absolutely possible. No question can that happen. This has been demonstrated in multiple psychological studies that, first of all, that we tend to fuse memories, we confuse details. We also tend to personalize memories, meaning we'll take a memory of something that happened to somebody else, and over time we'll remember it as happening to us. And it's actually really easy to get people to do that. You can, in a laboratory setting, you could very easily convince people that they had an experience they didn't have. In fact, just about a year or two ago, there was the Orville Redenbacher study where they did a psychological study where they told people that they were market testing a new popcorn. To one group, they actually gave them a sample of the popcorn to taste and then to describe how yummy it was. And to another group, they had them watch videos of other people tasting the popcorn, and the popcorn was described to them, but they never actually encountered the popcorn. And then a week later, a significant proportion of the people who never ate the popcorn had a memory of them eating the popcorn that they were told about but never actually ate. And anyway, that's just one example.
JFK.
So there's the Hill, testimony, the woman who was the closest to the headshot, of JFK. When she initially was interviewed by TV, she said that, she was standing, on the side of the street, but she didn't see anything. Basically said she had no extra details to add to the story. And then over a 40-year period, she was interviewed at regular intervals, pretty much. Her story evolved over time until she maybe saw somebody, then she definitely saw somebody. She saw fire shot from the grassy knoll, and by 30 years later, she was chasing somebody across the street into the grassy knoll. And you can see her story literally evolved. Now, sure, she had a lot of secondary gain. But it's absolutely plausible that her memory evolved in the retelling of that story. The other example, which was just a few years ago, 2009, I think, Hillary Clinton made the statement that in Bosnia, while she was landing in Bosnia, that at one point she was actually ducking and covering and running from sniper fire. Right. Never happened. There's video of her walking happily across the tarmac, and there was no gunshots. She was not dunking and running. So, in these cases, like with Hillary and with Brian Williams, it certainly seems plausible that their memories shifted over time, that they both would be quite foolish to fabricate a story that could be so easily debunked with video or with other testimony. So it's possible they were just stupid, but
So specifically to the point about Brian Williams, Stars and Stripes reported this. As you might imagine, it matters to them. Stars and Stripes reported this, and they had a box, a side box in the online article. And what they did was similar to what Evan just did. They showed different reporting of these same events in the box in different dates. Much like we were saying the woman with the 40 years. The first instance of someone conflating Brian Williams with the people in the helicopter wasn't Brian Williams. Somebody else at NBC talked about Brian Williams having been in the helicopter, although the previous report of that by Brian Williams was that it was the helicopter in front of him. It seems plausible that what happened was the story started getting told that way, and it's not like it was told 5 times a day. It was told once every few months someone came out with it. And as you said, it just evolved into this. To his credit, when he was confronted with the change in the story, he immediately came clean, completely came clean on it. But his career may be ruined anyway. Yeah. For a completely human failing.
Some people said, oh, well, he should have checked the record before talking about, well, he was talking about it off the cuff. It's not like he was doing a report about it. I mean, how many people, if you have a clear memory of something, I don't fault a non-psychologist or skeptic or whatever, somebody who isn't familiar with the memory literature for thinking that because they have a clear memory of something that it's, faulting them for thinking that the memory is accurate. Because that's everybody. Most people think that their memories are accurate, especially if they're clear. But clarity is actually not a predictor of accuracy. So now he knows. What I would love to see is this story turn into a story about how terrible our memories are.
Yeah, that's the actual critical thinking.
Yes, the unknown Novella. Go ahead.
Joe Novella. I would give him a pass because there's poetic license that you have to give people. If I was anywhere near any firing of any weapon in a war, I'd be like, I was in the mix. I was in the
Joe, what you're saying is that there's a slush factor in there if it can help you get laid.
I don't need help, Jay, like you. But if the plane in front of me was being shot at in Iraq, I would take credit for being under fire, honestly.
Well, the thing is, there's a big difference between, I don't want to say someone like you to make it sound bad, but there's a difference between, there's a big difference.
Private citizen versus the head of a major network's news.
Right. One of the big three. Yeah. Big three.
When I read the article, immediately I wanted to be as forgiving as I could, but I'm like, you actually screwed it up in your head whether or not you were in a helicopter that got hit by some type of shrapnel. Like that's
why
an
it's poetic
RPG.
license. That is poetic license. He knew the facts, but he was trying to, connect to. He was actually in an audience. Wasn't he in the at the hockey
Square
game?
Garden, yes.
Madison Square Garden, and he was trying to actually speak to how a former soldier had saved his life. So he was trying to create this story of danger and whatnot.
Yeah,
He put himself in the story.
I don't think there's any doubt that he really thought that was the clear recollection of the events of that day. He didn't go, like Steve said, he didn't go back and fact check it at the time. But the real point of all this is that, look, our brains are not tape recorders, right? We are not video cassette recorders. We fill in missing pieces of the puzzle all the time. Pictures, images, smells, sounds, everything. And our brain kind of has to do its best to take all these memories and try to piece it together as best as it can to make some semblance of a story that we can understand and relate to other people. Yeah. And that's unfortunately, it doesn't always work out.
But Joe, to your point, so I wouldn't give him a pass for consciously altering the details of a story for dramatic effect because he is a journalist. But our brains subconsciously alter the details per dramatic effect. That's exactly what they do. We're more interested. Our brains essentially err on the side of the emotional, thematic impact of the story.
Storytelling.
The story, yeah. What does the story mean? What's the lesson of the story? And then our brain alters the details, makes up new details in order to make it more emotionally impactful for whatever the lesson and the theme of the story is. If personalizing the story makes it more emotional, like if, you'll go back to our ancestors, in Africa where there's a lion in the woods.
We clearly evolved telling stories around a fireplace as opposed to reporting the news.
Well, this
exactly. So, if your friend was almost eaten by a lion, and you remember that as almost being eaten by a lion, you'll be that much more careful next time. What's been disappointing to me is in reading mainstream reports of this, assuming that he's lying. Like there's no other possible interpretation
that's
of what happened here. It's really naive as if to think that that's the only explanation. So it's actually a good teaching moment. I don't know how much we're going to get this out there, but it seems to be overwhelmed by the narrative that the media wants to tell. And their narrative is he was lying.
Right.
Because that gives them the opportunity to moralize and get on their high horse.
And it has to do with soldiers, which is a very sensitive subject on top of everything. And there's very little forgiveness when you start messing around with what actually happened, what didn't happen in a field of battle.
I think there's very little forgiveness for a news anchor of that magnitude. That's the problem. That's why I immediately got so turned off by the whole thing. Even though I can understand from a skeptical point of view, I feel sorry for him. If he really got caught up in the wash of, just the way our brains work, I feel really bad for him. But at the same time, we have to hold our media up to a higher standard. I don't think it's okay that he screwed it up.
No, I think it's okay he screwed up because otherwise it's an impossible standard. I think his reaction is what's important. And his reaction was, I thought I was going crazy, but I checked and they're right. And this is what happened. And he immediately apologized, corrected the record. What else can you expect? I don't think we can expect people never to have a brain fart, as Evan said. We do this every week. We make a mistake like that. Practically, if you talk for an hour about factual details, you will make those kinds of memory errors and factual errors. I think the standard should be you acknowledge it and you correct it and you move on.
Yeah.
You don't dig in your heels. You don't pretend it didn't happen.
I actually tend to agree with this interpretation of this thing. It's the most probable. I mean, nobody really knows, right?
Yeah, nobody knows.
But it's most probable interpretation. And in fact, I've seen happen. It may have happened to me as well. Of course, I don't have a good memory of it otherwise, but I've seen happening, for instance, for people that speak a lot, which includes, of course, journalists, media personalities. But you go around and you tell a good story that somebody's told you about it, and then years later you repeat the same story, and all of a sudden you are the protagonist. You are the one that actually did it. You were at that particular location. And I really don't think that we should expect that level of perfect memory and perfect behavior from people. What we should expect, as Steve said, is that if something comes up like this, then you're the first one to go back, check, and say, oh, crap, I wasn't mistaken. The only thing I'm not concerned about it, and this came up a few minutes ago, is Brian Williams' career. Regardless of how things are going to go, he's got a perfect spot at Fox News. So it's like, he's going to have a career no matter what. NBC or Fox News, he's fine. The thing that really amazes me is how so many in the media are so prompt to moralize in these kind of situations when they in fact give incredible amount of leeway and passing to other situations which are much more grave. Because after all, who is actually being hurt here other than Brian Williams himself? There is lots of other issues in the news every day where the news media don't do their fact-checking job and they don't go after the people, and those actually have consequences. So that's the thing that really upsets me.
Yeah, exactly. Ironically, it is the journalists who are calling Brian Williams a liar who should really be embarrassed. And you know what I mean? Not Brian Williams. He's just a human, and he admitted it, and he moved on, and that's fine.
Hey, look, maybe if they took a more skeptical approach or familiarized them a little bit more with kind of the work that, we do and other organizations do in a skeptical approach, maybe they would be able to kind of see this for probably what it was, but it kind of goes to show that they don't. And that's a shame.
It actually points up two problems. One is the 24-hour news cycle. Now you have several stations all dedicated to news 24 hours a day. They have to fill up 24 hours even when there's nothing interesting to talk about. Back when Steve and I were kids and you didn't exist yet, Jay, Walter Cronkite was really well trusted. You only saw him on the air for an hour a night. I think. I could be remembering that wrong. You only saw him on the air for an hour a night, and no one knew what his opinions on anything was. Literally, after he retired, we found out that he was pro gun control, and he was he had all these things that no one would have trusted the guy at all if they actually knew about him.
And everybody probably thought that he agreed with what they thought.
Yeah, there were studies and everybody thought he agreed with them on stuff. And now we have people, they've got to fill airtime. And so we're actually talking about the media, talking about something that happened to someone in the media 12 years ago. That's what this big story all this week is about. It's literally the media talking about a member of the media, something he did
and now we're talking about that.
And said wrong 12 years ago. And now we're talking about that.